Sarah stared in horror as the HOA board set fire to her favorite dresses, blazing in the middle of the courtyard. The acrid smoke stung her eyes as she screamed, "You have no right to do this." The board president sneered, "You broke the rules. Now you'll pay." As the last garment crumbled to ash, Sarah vowed to get justice, no matter the cost. The morning sun had barely crept over the horizon when Sarah's doorbell rang. She opened the door to find the entire homeowners association board standing on her doorstep. "What is the meaning of this?" Sarah demanded, still groggy from sleep. The HOA president, Margaret, held up a stack of papers. "We have a complaint about your unsightly attire violating community dress code. You have 24 hours to remove these items from the premises." Sarah's mouth fell open. "But these are my personal belongings. You can't just." "We can, and we will," Margaret interrupted. "If you fail to comply, we'll be forced to take matters into our own hands." With that, the board members turned and marched back down the path, leaving Sarah stunned on her doorstep. She stared at the list in her hands, an extensive catalog of her entire wardrobe, every dress, blouse, and pair of pants meticulously documented. Later that afternoon, Sarah frantically began packing her clothes into boxes, her heart racing. As she loaded the last item, she heard a commotion outside. Peering through the window, she watched in horror as the HOA board members gathered in the courtyard, dousing her belongings with gasoline. "No, stop!" she cried, rushing outside, but it was too late. With a flick of a match, the flames erupted, engulfing her carefully folded outfits. Sarah stood paralyzed, tears streaming down her face as she watched everything she owned turn to ash. The acrid smoke stung her eyes, making them water. Margaret approached, a twisted smile on her face. "We warned you, Sarah. You chose to defy us." Anger boiled up inside Sarah, mingling with her grief. "You have no right to do this. These are my personal possessions. I'll sue you all for every penny you have." The HOA president merely shrugged. Good luck with that. As the last of Sarah's wardrobe crumbled to the ground, she vowed to get justice, no matter the cost. With shaking hands, Sarah placed the final call to her lawyer, Greg. "They burned everything, Greg. All of my clothes, just gone." "I'm so sorry, Sarah," he replied. "That's a clear violation of your rights as a homeowner. We're going to make them pay for this, I promise." Over the next few days, Sarah meticulously documented every item that had been destroyed. She combed through old receipts, photos, and bank statements, compiling a detailed inventory. The total value of her wardrobe amounted to over $50,000. With the evidence in hand, Greg got to work drafting the lawsuit. He outlined the HOA's egregious breach of Sarah's privacy, the willful destruction of her personal property, and the emotional distress caused by their actions. "We're going to hit them hard," Greg assured her. "Not only will we demand compensation for the lost items, but punitive damages as well. This kind of behavior can't be tolerated." As the legal proceedings got underway, Sarah found herself the center of attention in her tight-knit community. Neighbors stopped her on the street, expressing outrage over the HOA's actions. Word had spread quickly of the burned clothes, and many residents were appalled by the board's flagrant abuse of power. "I always thought they were a little power-hungry, but this is just unconscionable," one neighbor, Jill, told Sarah. "You have to make them pay." Sarah nodded, her jaw set with determination. "That's exactly what I intend to do." In the courtroom, Greg presented the HOA's egregious conduct in vivid detail. He painted a picture of the board members callously setting fire to Sarah's belongings, with no regard for her rights or emotional well-being. The judge listened intently, his brow furrowed. When Greg finished, he turned to the HOA's attorney. "Do you have any defense for this outrageous behavior?" The lawyer shifted uncomfortably. "Your Honor, the HOA was simply enforcing its community standards. Standards that clearly violate this individual's constitutional rights," the judge interrupted. I'm inclined to rule in the plaintiff's favor. Unless you have a compelling argument, I'll be awarding substantial damages." As the HOA's attorney stammered, Sarah allowed herself a small smile. Justice was finally within her grasp. The HOA's attorney rose, his face tense. "Your Honor, the board acted in good faith to enforce our community's established dress code. We felt Ms. Taylor's wardrobe was in clear violation, and that gave you the right to destroy her personal property." The judge interrupted, his voice sharp. "I'm having a hard time seeing how burning a woman's clothes in public could possibly be considered good faith enforcement." The lawyer shifted uncomfortably. We wanted to send a strong message about the importance of adhering to our bylaws. By publicly humiliating and traumatizing a resident, the judge shook his head. "I'm sorry, but I find that explanation completely unacceptable." He turned to Greg. "Counselor, please proceed with your closing arguments." Greg stood, his expression grim. "Your Honor, the HOA's actions were not only a gross violation of my client's rights, but an unconscionable abuse of power. They destroyed thousands of dollars worth of her personal belongings, causing immense emotional distress. This was not about community standards. It was an act of petty vindictiveness, plain and simple." He paused, his gaze sweeping the courtroom. "Ms. Taylor is a law-abiding citizen who has lived in this community for over a decade. She has always been respectful of the HOA's rules and regulations. Yet the board saw fit to humiliate her in front of her neighbors, reducing her to tears as they burned her possessions." Greg turned to face the judge. "We are seeking not only full restitution for the value of the destroyed items, but also substantial punitive damages to send a clear message. This kind of behavior will not be tolerated. My client deserves justice, and she deserves to feel safe and respected in her own home." The judge nodded slowly. "Thank you, Counselor. I will take this matter under advisement and issue a ruling within the next 48 hours." As Sarah and Greg exited the courthouse, she squeezed his arm. "Do you really think we have a chance at winning?" Greg smiled reassuringly. "After that performance in there, I'd say the odds are in our favor. This judge isn't going to let the HOA to get away with their blatant abuse of power." Sarah nodded, hope kindling in her chest. Perhaps justice was within her grasp after all. 2 days later, Sarah nervously waited in the courtroom as the judge took his seat. The air was thick with anticipation as he cleared his throat and began to speak. "This case has been a troubling one to consider. The actions taken by the Homeowners Association Board against the plaintiff, Ms. Sarah Taylor, were nothing short of egregious. Their public destruction of her personal property was a clear violation of her constitutional rights and an abuse of the power entrusted to them." Sarah felt a weight lift from her shoulders as the judge continued. "The HOA's argument that they were merely enforcing community standards is patently absurd. Burning a resident's belongings in the town square is the antithesis of reasonable enforcement. It was an act of vindictive retaliation, plain and simple." The HOA board members shifted uncomfortably in their seats, faces flushed with anger and embarrassment. "Therefore, I am ruling in favor of the plaintiff. Ms. Taylor is to be awarded the full value of her destroyed wardrobe, totaling $52,743. Additionally, I am imposing punitive damages in the amount of $100,000 to be paid by the Homeowners Association." Sarah felt a surge of elation, tears streaming down her face. Justice had been served. The judge turned his gaze to the HOA board. "This kind of behavior cannot be tolerated. You have grossly abused your authority and violated the trust placed in you by this community. I strongly suggest you take a long, hard look at your bylaws and procedures to ensure nothing like this ever happens again." As the ruling was read, a murmur swept through the courtroom. Neighbors who had rallied behind Sarah nodded in satisfaction, while the HOA members wore expressions of shock and dismay. Sarah caught Margaret's eye, the HOA president's face twisted with rage. In that moment, Sarah knew her fight was far from over. The board would not go down without a fight. But for now, she savored her victory. The $152,743 judgment would go a long way towards rebuilding her life. As she and Greg left the courthouse, she squeezed his hand tightly. "Thank you for believing in me," she said, her voice thick with emotion. "I couldn't have done this without you." Greg smiled warmly. "That's what friends are for. Now let's go celebrate. You deserve it." As they walked away, Sarah couldn't help but glance back at the sullen, defeated HOA board. The worst she knew was yet to come. The sound of Sarah's doorbell ringing jolted her awake. She peered through the window, only to find the entire HOA board standing on her doorstep once more. Steeling herself, she opened the door. "What do you want?" she demanded. Margaret, the HOA president, glared at her. "We're here to inform you that we're appealing the court's decision." Sarah felt her stomach drop. On what grounds? The judge's ruling was biased and unjust, Margaret snapped. "We're confident it will be overturned on appeal." "You can't be serious," Sarah said, her voice trembling with disbelief. "The evidence was overwhelming. The judge saw through your pathetic excuses." "We have new evidence that will change the court's mind," Margaret replied, a triumphant gleam in her eye. Sarah's mind raced. What kind of evidence? "That's for the appeals court to decide." Margaret turned to leave, then paused. "Oh, and by the way, you're in violation of the dress code again. We'll be meeting tomorrow to discuss further disciplinary action." As the HOA board members disappeared down the path, Sarah slammed the door, her hands shaking. Just when she thought she'd finally found justice, the board was determined to drag her through the legal system all over again. Greg was equally outraged when Sarah relayed the news. "Those vultures won't give up, will they? Don't worry, we'll be ready for them in court. This time, we'll bring an even stronger case." Over the next few weeks, Sarah and Greg pored over every detail of the original trial, leaving no stone unturned. They were determined to expose the HOA's underhanded tactics and ensure the ruling stood. The appeals hearing was a tense and grueling affair. The HOA's lawyers presented their new evidence. A series of blurry photos allegedly showing Sarah in inappropriate attire around the neighborhood. Sarah fumed as Greg systematically dismantled their claims, highlighting the inconsistencies and lack of credible documentation. When it was their turn, Greg laid out the timeline of events in vivid detail, painting a damning picture of the HOA's egregious actions. He meticulously recounted the public humiliation, the wanton destruction of property, and the board's utter disregard for Sarah's rights. As the hearing drew to a close, Sarah held her breath, praying the appeals court would see through the HOA's desperate ploy. The fate of her hard-won victory now hung in the balance. The appeals court judge cleared his throat, his gaze sweeping the tense courtroom. After carefully reviewing the evidence and arguments presented by both sides, this court has reached a decision. Sarah gripped the edge of her seat, her heart pounding in her ears. This was it, the moment that would determine the fate of her hard-won victory. "We find no grounds to overturn the original ruling," the judge announced, his voice firm. The Homeowners Association's actions were a clear violation of the plaintiff's constitutional rights, and the damages awarded were entirely justified. A collective gasp rippled through the room as the HOA board members sank back into their chairs, stunned expressions on their faces. Sarah felt a surge of relief wash over her, tears of joy stinging her eyes. The judge continued, "The HOA's attempt to introduce new evidence was nothing more than a transparent ploy to undermine the court's previous findings. This board has displayed a shocking disregard for the rights and well-being of its residents, and we will not tolerate such behavior." He paused, his gaze settling on the defeated HOA members. The original judgment stands in its entirety. Miss Taylor is to be awarded the full $152,743, effective immediately. Furthermore, This court is placing the Homeowners Association under close scrutiny for the foreseeable future. Any further infractions will be met with the strictest possible sanctions. As the judge's words sank in, Sarah felt a weight lift from her shoulders. She had won, not just the legal battle, but a hard-fought victory for her sense of dignity and justice. Turning to Greg, she pulled him into a tight embrace. "We did it," she whispered, her voice trembling with emotion. "Thank you for never giving up on me." Greg squeezed her hand reassuringly. "I knew you had a case worth fighting for. This just goes to show that the truth will always prevail, no matter how powerful your opponents may be." As they exited the courthouse, Sarah couldn't help but glance back at the dejected HOA board members. Margaret's face was flushed with humiliation, her eyes narrowed in bitter defeat. Sarah felt a twinge of satisfaction, knowing that the tables had finally turned. Now it was time to rebuild her life. With the substantial financial settlement, she could start fresh, free from the constant threat and indignity imposed by the overzealous HOA. For the first time in months, Sarah felt a sense of genuine hope for the future. As she and Greg walked away, she couldn't help but wonder what the next chapter would hold. One thing was certain: she was no longer the victim, but the victor. And that was a feeling she intended to savor for a very long time. In the aftermath of the court's final ruling, the once powerful HOA board found itself in a state of disarray. The humiliating defeat at the hands of Sarah and her legal team had shaken their confidence, and the community's trust in their leadership had been irreparably fractured. Margaret, the HOA president, had been the driving force behind the crusade against Sarah's wardrobe. But now, her fellow board members, once loyal supporters, began to question her judgment and motives. "This whole debacle has been an absolute disaster for the HOA," one board member, Janet, said during a tense meeting. "We're the laughingstock of the neighborhood. How are we supposed to maintain any credibility after this?" Margaret's face flushed with anger. "We were simply trying to uphold the community standards that residents agreed to when they moved here." Sarah's blatant disregard for the dress code was unacceptable. "Burning her clothes in the town square?" Janet scoffed. "That was beyond the pale, and you know it. We're lucky the judge didn't disband the HOA entirely." The other board members murmured in agreement, their expressions grim. Margaret's grip on power was slipping, and she knew it. In the days that followed, the community's resentment towards the HOA only grew. Neighbors who had once been apathetic about the organization's activities now openly criticized its heavy-handed tactics and lack of accountability. Sarah, meanwhile, had used her settlement to open a small boutique in the heart of the neighborhood. Word of her triumph over the HOA had spread quickly, and the store quickly became a hub of activity, with residents flocking to support her. "I'm so glad you're doing this," Jill, one of Sarah's loyal supporters, said as she browsed the racks. "It's like a big middle finger to the HOA. They had it coming." Sarah smiled, a newfound confidence radiating from her. "I'm just glad I can move on with my life. No more worrying about their ridiculous rules and petty power plays." As the HOA board members watched Sarah's thriving business from afar, a sense of resentment and envy began to fester. They had lost not only the legal battle, but the public's goodwill, a devastating blow to their collective ego. Margaret, once the undisputed ruler of the community, now found herself increasingly isolated and marginalized. The other board members, sensing an opportunity, began to plot her downfall, determined to salvage what was left of the HOA's tarnished reputation. The stage was set for a final showdown, one that would determine the fate of the community and the legacy of those who sought to control it. The tension within the HOA board had reached a boiling point. Margaret, the once formidable president, found herself increasingly isolated as the other members turned against her. In a last-ditch effort to regain control, she called an emergency meeting, determined to rally her supporters and solidify her position. "This has gone on long enough," she declared, her eyes narrowed. Sarah Taylor's little boutique is a constant reminder of our humiliation. It's time we put an end to her little venture once and for all. But the other board members were no longer cowed by Margaret's bluster. Janet, the vocal critic, stood and faced her squarely. "You're the one who got us into this mess in the first place," she said, her voice dripping with contempt. "Your reckless actions have cost this community dearly, and we won't let you drag us down any further." The room erupted into heated debate as the board members argued and traded accusations. In the midst of the chaos, Sarah sat in her store, blissfully unaware of the drama unfolding just a few blocks away. It was only when the police arrived at her doorstep that she realized something was amiss. The officers informed her that the HOA had filed a complaint, alleging that her boutique was in violation of several community bylaws. "This has to be a mistake," Sarah protested, her heart sinking. "I've followed every rule to the letter." But the officers shook their heads. "I'm sorry, ma'am, but we have no choice but to shut down your business until the matter is resolved." As the police cordoned off her store, Sarah felt a familiar sense of dread wash over her. The HOA, it seemed, was determined to have the last word. In the end, it was a lengthy legal battle, but Sarah emerged victorious once more. The judge, incensed by the HOA's blatant retaliation, not only dismissed the complaint, but ordered the organization to pay Sarah an additional $25,000 in damages. With the final ruling in hand, Sarah stood outside her freshly reopened boutique, a triumphant smile on her face. The HOA, once a formidable foe, had been reduced to a shadow of its former self, its members in disarray, and its reputation forever tarnished. As she unlocked the door and welcomed her first customers of the day, Sarah couldn't help but feel a profound sense of satisfaction. She had fought for her rights, and she had won, not just for herself, but for every resident who had ever fallen victim to the HOA's heavy-handed tactics. This was her victory, hard-earned and well-deserved, and she intended to savor it for a very long time to come.